So hello, everyone, and welcome to Reniel Del Rosario's Artist in Resident Talk. I'm Nathan Stanfield, the studio manager at the American Museum of Ceramic Art in Southern California. AMOCA champions the art, history, creation, and technology of ceramics through exhibitions, collections, outreach, and studio programming. Today's Artist Talk focuses on the work of Reniel Del Rosario, who arrived in September for a long-term residency here in the AMOCA Studio. AMOCA's Artist in Residence program, established in 2012, is one of our few long-term fellowship opportunities for ceramic artists on the West Coast. Our residency program, which provides artists an opportunity to produce or develop a new body of work, is funded through the generous support from Julianne and David Armstrong, Laguna Clay and Glaze Company, and the Windgate Foundation. The next call for residency applications will be in January 2025. Today, Reniel will be sharing some of those recent work and talk about plans for his time during his residency here at AMOCA. I'm excited to tell you a little bit about Reniel before we get started. Reniel Del Rosario uses ceramics, quantity, and satire to discuss themes of commodification and value. His projects range from interactive mimicries of consumer establishments to reimaginings of artifacts to imperfect copies of already existing objects. He holds a BA in art practice from the University of California at Berkeley. He is a 2019 recipient of the Center for Crafts Windgate-Lamar Fellowship, a 2022 SFMOMA Artist Soapbox Derby racer, and has been featured in writings such as ARTFORUM and Bon Appetit. His work has been exhibited internationally through traditional and alternative venues such as West Coast Craft, Meta Open Arts, the Contemporary Art Museum, St. Louis, Catharine Clark Gallery, and the 79th Scripps Ceramics Annual, Lode Nadito, San Francisco Art Fair, Praise Shadows Art Gallery, and San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, James Lombard Gallery, and simply on public sidewalk. Reniel will be in residence at AMOCA through August of 2025. So before we get started with Reniel's presentation, I just want to remind you this talk is being recorded and there will be an opportunity for Q&A after the presentation. I will now turn the presentation over to Reniel.
All right. Thank you, Nathan, for the introduction, and thank you, AMOCA, for hosting this. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. So this is my artist talk. It has a lot of images in it, so be prepared to be able to glance at something for just a second or two. It's because I'm going to go through a lot of my practice and what I do that I think helps make my work unique and convoluted and hopefully funny. If you think something's funny, please put a haha or LOL in the chat so I know that it's funny. I usually do the artist talks in person, so I usually get my ego stroked by people laughing, but now it's sort of weird and sterile on Zoom. But thank you all for being here. So I always like to start my talks with this project that I think really became the starting point for my practice. In short, UC Berkeley didn't participate in this one ceramics conference that was held in Davis every single year. We didn't participate because of some bad blood that was going on. And so me starting off in ceramics at Berkeley, getting really into the medium, I was sort of disheartened to hear that we wouldn't have a booth or we wouldn't be going. And they told me that if I wanted to go, I could go, but we just won't have a booth or anything. And I said, yeah, sure, why not? And so I figured if I was going to go, I wanted to make it this kind of a project that would go along with the final project with my intermediate ceramics course, which was to make a conceptual project. And I was really butting heads with the professor. I didn't know what conceptual art was. And he gave me a list of 7 things to do to make conceptual art. And I said, I want an A, so I'm going to do every single thing on there. So it started off with me making ephemera, such as this produce box, and making all the ceramic fruit and produce that would be sold out of it, out of deteriorated old materials that UC Berkeley studio had for the past decade or 2 decades. And it was me making this weird, ugly produce, but also it didn't look like it really, but I figured if you made a sticker that looked like the Chiquita banana logo and slapped it on, it suddenly looks a lot more like produce than nothing at all. And to go on with that, I also decided to sell it for the 3 days that the conference was happening in 100-degree heat, walking gallery to gallery into spaces that I was not supposed to technically be in, showcasing my own art, selling to people on the public sidewalk. And whenever people were curious, I'd take up space that I was not supposed to be taking up space in. So I would sit the box down, talk to them about the project, and try to sell them some ceramic produce. And it was really great and it was a lot of fun. But at the end of it, working for 3 days, walking around, like I said, 100-degree heat, I made $60. And I told myself, oh my God, I suck at this stuff. And I thought, I'm never going to do anything like this ever again. And then the next year, the conference was happening again. And I figured, I'm going to do it. I want to do it, but I want to do it better. And so came this project called The American Dream / Rene's Delicatessen. And as you can see, it really went from me going around in my normal clothing to I needed to commit to the bit and really focus on everything I could to make this project feel like it is an impersonation of something that is supposed to be there. And that included making much more detailed ephemera, like this mobile stand with a canopy with a logo, and setting it up across the street from the main gallery and selling this to people walking by, setting up my stall and selling the American delicatessen food for the price of the actual food in the area based on going on Yelp, searching up artisanal donut, artisanal sandwich, and charging the same price for that exact object. And to do this, I also had to make all this other crap that had to go with it. So, if I want it to look like a trustworthy business, you just have to have a photo, make it sepia, crumple it up, and then hang it and frame it. And suddenly you have this kind of ambiance of a trustworthy old mom and pop business. Or you can also make all these signs, such as best of, and make it for this fake city award that this delicatessen has won, and also making all these menus. And before I would go to the site, a week before, I would go and hang up advertisements around town, acting like this was a new business popping up and making a venture in the city. And so people would get some kind of subliminal note about it before I even showed up. And it even meant, getting the uniform, which isn't a real uniform, it's just oil on canvas that I cut out to be apron shaped, getting a name tag, and getting a haircut that matched mid-century America, which is what the project was based on. So every time I did this project, I would have to get a haircut that matched post-war American men's haircuts. And so this would happen every time I did this project. And of course, if you're selling stuff, you have to have receipts that I have to print out from my printer, cut individually one by one, and then fill it out as everything is bought. Oh, and then there's also a survey on the bottom, like all great receipts, and it's an actual giveaway where if people filled it out, I would give them something in a lucky raffle. And then, I really loved the project and I started doing it in other ways. And so there was this show that I was rejected from where it was a food themed show. And I said, that's not going to stop me because I'm now used to being this little infiltrating demon. And I told myself, okay, I didn't get accepted to the show, but I'm still going to show up. I'm going to sell to people coming in and out of the gallery, and they're just going to roll with it. And that's sort of how it went, because it's this kind of weird project that no one's going to really try to put a stop to because I'm just on the public sidewalk utilizing that space and utilizing the kind of ambiance that's around me of the art gallery opening. And then eventually I started going even further and thought a fun place to do this would be at a craft fair where, I wanted to continue this idea of selling things for the same price as the actual good. And so at a craft fair, there's really this, you go there and you spend quite a bit of money because there's a lot of luxury goods there. And I decided I'm going to mess with people and sell the cheapest things at this fair so people can leave with something that's $1, $4, $10. And, it was over 800 ceramic objects all sold for the same price as the actual thing in this brightly colored, annoying red striped tent in this very beige fair that was selling a lot of beige goods. And so it's really austere and like it gets your attention. And it's all familiar kind of ephemera from business licenses, smoke detectors, signs. I actually hired workers, put them through training, made their own uniforms out of canvas cut into aprons. And it just sort of kept on evolving into that shape. And, I just got really obsessed with stores and the idea of using ceramics as props for these kinds of conceptual projects of selling and playing with markets. And so this is one where it's an art store, and the main thing is selling art supplies, but also selling the gimmicky, kitschy stuff that they sell near the register to try to upsell you and add another $10, $20 on your thing, like Van Gogh notebooks or Yayoi Kusama erasers, things like that. This is a Sari Sari store, which is like a Filipino rural convenience store, but instead of selling everyday goods, it only sold products introduced to the Philippines through waves of colonization and imperialism. This is a used ceramics lot. I went through the dumpster at the end of the year and got all the ceramic junk that was being thrown away. And I set it up and had this persona of a used car salesman. And I was pitching it to people like they were all genuine, great works of art. And people were able to put their own price on things. And it was amazing to see this kind of idea of what people think has value, what doesn't have value. And so people were leaving with people who had work in museums for $4 and beginning artists' work for, $80, $90. And then for my senior thesis at Berkeley, I decided to make a gift shop, which had souvenirs that only pertained to me and were specific to me. And so there were these kinds of kitschy, tchotchke things that I made out of ceramic. And then I made the packaging in Photoshop, as well as all the signage. And so I'll get more onto this later, as this is a project that I really expanded on. And then in 2019, I got the Windgate-Lamar Fellowship, which was really great. It let me go to the Philippines, chat with the University of the Philippines at Diliman about ceramics. It let me go to craft centers or craft cities in the Philippines that are big on craft. It also let me see these things, which are indigenous burial jars and burial vessels that I thought were always unique because a lot of them were destroyed by the Spanish. So very few, or not very few, but a lot got destroyed during our colonization for 333 years. And then with Mark Salvatus, I did this one project that I always wanted to do based on the Sari Sari store. So sort of like that project I introduced earlier, but sort of based on this Balik Bayan box, which is this care package that we send to our family in the Philippines. So that's my actual grandma and my actual aunt in the Philippines, and an actual care package that we sent. And basically, these care packages would have things that would be much more expensive to purchase in the Philippines than it would be for us to buy it here and ship it over to them. And so I sent over to Mark Salvotis and his project space, Lod Nadito, a Balik Bayan box, and it had all these ceramic objects that are things that you would send over or would hope to send over to your family. And it's set up in the residential streets of the Philippines. I am an American businessman selling them to people in the streets, not talking any Tagalog, Filipino, or anything, and just speaking to them in harsh English about buying these goods that are good American imports. And so there's literature, there's perfumes, there's canned goods, Western apparel. And it was this really fun project because this was either my do or die, because I wanted to continue selling these things for the price of the actual thing. And some of these things were sold on the streets for as much as 10 US cents. And that was when I said, I want to keep on doing this like this, because there's no other way the projects can work for me like that. And then the pandemic happened. And I sort of had to stop all these social practice projects that were interacting with the community. So I started making clusters and piles of things because I got really obsessed with quantity, as you can tell. And I eventually went back to the things that I saw in the Philippines, which just happened a few months prior to the whole lockdown. And I was thinking about these burial vessels that a lot of the Spanish destroyed. And I was going on eBay and I was finding them being sold on the eBay marketplace, which seemed really weird. And I wanted to start making my own. And I made one that tried to mimic them. And I was like, I don't know who that is, or I don't know what this is a burial jar for. And so I started making them as burial jars for my memories. And so burial jar for the memory of me eating butter from McDonald's when I first arrived in America, or a burial jar for when they broke into my house in second grade and they broke in through the garage window, or a burial jar for all the things I wanted during lockdown, or Mark Twain writing against the American colonization of the Philippines. and things like that. And so this kind of idea of having the burial jar as not standing in for a body, but as this kind of preservation of memory and ideas that I want to keep on. But, you know, I couldn't stay away from the stores much longer because I am antsy and I really wanted to do something. We still weren't interacting at the time, so I figured the next best thing would be to go on my favorite shopping platform, eBay, and start selling ceramic versions of objects, copying and pasting the exact wordings, titles, and paragraph descriptions that are used for actual listings of the real object and just changing them into art blurbs. And so it's a ceramic piece of toilet paper put on eBay. The actual title and the description are taken from a real listing for toilet paper on eBay that I then just change the words for to be art speak. And it's the same thing with like a picture of Jesus on toast that I made out of ceramic. And that's something that I would look at as a kid a lot. Like eBay used to have this weird oddities page, and I would just scan that for hours as a kid, trying to find like haunted things or Jesus on whatever. And it's the same concept where these are titles and body paragraphs from real listings that I then just alter a few words to make it more art speak. And then I figured I couldn't stop with the eBay project there. I had to do it with Cheetos because Cheetos and the shapes of things on eBay are really big. And so I made a bunch of Cheetos in the shapes of things. And something that I thought was really funny that whenever they sell Cheetos on eBay is that they always have to put a picture of the actual object next to it in the thumbnail, because otherwise you wouldn't know what it's supposed to look like. And so it's copying that, making all these individual pictures and sort of collages. And then I got asked to make work for this one show. And, you know, I was making all this American food. I proposed the American food project, the American Dream, Raised Delicatessen, a big pile of American delicatessen food. And they told me to make it more Filipino. And it was sort of weird because it's like, oh, I never made Filipino food before. And so I went ahead and made a bunch of ceramic Filipino food, but based on a bunch of mythology like eating dog or all these offals that are more historically accurate for the natives in the Philippines when colonization was happening. And so, you know, a lot of that is based on also the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, where they had, I think, 7,000 Filipinos flown out from the Philippines to be part of this World's Fair in the middle of America to act out on these kinds of fucked up and just very racist portrayals of the native people in exchange for money and food. And so it's like taking sources from that as well. And then, you know, pandemic lightened up and I got to do more store projects. And I really got obsessed with these little action figures I was making, these kinds of little knickknacks, gimcracks, whatever you want to call it. And I wanted to really make something about them or have a big focus on them. And so Catharine Clark Gallery in 2021 had this show about Black Mountain College. And they asked me to make a piece for it. And I said, I'm going to turn the back store into a gift shop for Black Mountain College, which is a place that doesn't really exist anymore, but is now going to show and sell all these objects about Black Mountain College. And so it is this gift shop that copies sort of the essence of museum gift shops. And so here we have hundreds of ceramic objects and all these packaging gimcracks, which are sort of based on Dollar Tree toys that I would see growing up or at the flea market. And it's like this really cheap plastic paper label and a toy or something alluring inside. But instead of making them about something that would be an actual souvenir, I want to make them about things that are not commodified and things that are not getting their shine or are not something that people want to talk about. And so, for example, getting souvenirs about MC Richards or Clayton Bailey, or about artists that I feel like at the time weren't getting enough views, like Kathy Lou or Nikki Green. Or honestly, just random stuff too, like spam slices or a old BART ticket that was discontinued earlier that year. Or here are some things that museum gift shops would not want to talk about, such as the money women lose or macho male starter kits. Or the discrepancy between artists and the dealers, such as the artists smoking cigarettes and the dealers smoking fancy cigars. But it also has this kind of thing where I just want to have fun with it. So there's like bootleg Ai Weiweis, there's energy glues based on Brian Rochefort. And then there's really niche references, which I really like John Cage's tuned piano having a souvenir where it's all the screws that he would shove into a piano, or a condom that was because of the 1960s post-war artists all having sex with each other. Or things referencing contemporary things like the banana and duct tape is 2 separate packages for sale. And just really, really specific things like John Wiener's poem that mentioned one line about having spaghetti for dinner at Black Mountain College that I said, that's really specific and really just almost forgettable. I want to make something to commodify that and commemorate that. And so making a package about that spaghetti and meatballs for dinner poem. Or even things like John Baldessari's ball photographs, and including weird details like a beautifully pure game for humans and dogs named after artists because the dog was named Giotto. And so these packages all have these weird little things in them. And so, I make them in Photoshop. I find something obscure that I want to do. For example, this Ruth Asawa cast persimmons from 1994 that no image of it exists. And the museum that I contacted about them said they don't have an image of it. They don't know what happened to it or whatever. And it's just me working on layers on one giant sheet. So I just sort of build on hundreds of layers. Finding a good background, modifying it in Photoshop, putting in all these little details, but also details such as that shape in the middle is that persimmon shape copy and pasted, or like that Ruth is actually Ruth Asawa's signature. And so putting in all these little things, like also that sorry, my little bar is blocking it. Like the little price tag thing, like was $86.80 because that's the actual price that the museum originally bought them for. And so putting in all these like random tidbits of information that I think for the most part go over people's heads, but at the same time is just part of it because it just makes it just overwhelming, information overload, and hyper obsessive. That's sort of what all these are all about. And it's also about, thinking about where these things are. And so, for example, this package piece I did in Boston and taking a photo and extrapolating this lobster that was from downtown Boston and putting it in the package specifically for this, and really trying to do weird, stupid niche references like the text being the shape of Massachusetts. Like all these little details are things that are meant to be overlooked, but at the same time, they're there for you to find out. And continue with the gift shop. There's all these other little objects too, and they're sort of based on the British Museum and how they sell miniature replicas of things in their collection. And so I was selling miniature replicas of things from Black Mountain College, like Cy Twombly, or Peter Voulkos, or Pablo Picasso, Arneson, Annabeth Rosen. So things about the legacy of Black Mountain College and Black Mountain College's artists. But also I had to copy what a museum does, and they sell prints on the wall. So I have ceramic prints, just like how SFMOMA has prints in their gift shop. And so there's all these copies of, not perfect replicas of paintings, wall hanging things. And they're all little wonky, misshapen, improper. Everything's misglazed because I just mix glazes together and I say whatever comes out is how I want to come out. And so it's a lot of play in there too of me saying whatever happens, happens. Oh, and there's a mascot too. So that's Rauschenberg's goat, and I was the mascot. And then now we get to the Derby car. And so in 2022, SFMOMA asked me to be in their new Derby race, which they didn't do in almost 50 years. And they said the only requisite is that it has to be somewhat related to your practice. And so it was either going to be a burrito truck or an ice cream truck. And I used to actually work in Vallejo's oldest ice cream kitchen. And so I said, okay, I'm going to make an ice cream truck because I feel like I can pull more from that. And so it's based on Leled's Candy Kitchen in Vallejo, and it's Renren's Ice Cream Parlor, which the logo is based off of that and extrapolate from that. And so we had to build this car. Of course, you had to go all out, have the trim, have the colors, have the grill made out of paper mache. Of course, if we're going the full route and being an ice cream team, we have to also screen print all our shirts with sponsors, have a jumpsuit screen printed with sponsors. And then we also have to sell ceramic ice cream that is based on things in SFMOMA's art collection or the Bay Area in general. So there's International Orange Creamsicle, like the Golden Gate Bridge color, Sourdough Clam Chowder Bread Bowl, Joan Brownies, Joy DeForest, Ice Cream with a Hat, Viola Fries, Ron Bagel, Finish the... It gets really stupid really quick, and I really love that. Urinal cake cone, frog cream pie, mendieta merienda, Manuel berry and cream. Like it just gets really dumb. I really like how stupid these things can get, which I think I take from like really loving funk and nut art. And of course, you have to put them on the side of the truck, like an actual ice cream truck, and you have to sell it out of the truck during the day of. And as you go down, there's me and my team, and there's me crossing the finish line at SFMOMA, and there it is in SFMOMA afterwards, without the front wheels because they broke. But yeah, this is an installation I did for Facebook headquarters. It's 200 ceramic security cameras all in one place with one real security camera watching you. I thought this was just a fun project to include there to show you how I'm still obsessed with quantity and numbers and also just absurdness. We're back with packages. This was at Jane Lombard, New York. I've never been to New York before this show. And so I wanted to make a bunch of souvenirs based on New York, based on the stereotypes that I know. And so, for example, the most god-awful souvenir, and you know it. Okay, it's tacky, it's more kitchen tacky, but you get it. Or things about New York that are not talked about, like New York land being bought from native people for $24 in beads. So also going on commodifying things that would not be commodified once again. Or even things like really super niche, like the Earth Room, which is this apartment that's just full of dirt that my first art professor told me about, and I've just been obsessed with it ever since. So like that place would never have a souvenir, so I'm gonna make a souvenir about it. More souvenirs, so like the fuck are you doing? Just jump the turnstile, catnip for the beloved bodega cat, that free shit at galleries, petrified sweat from the New York summer, life-sustaining, cheap as hell, greasy, oily, godforsaken, fresh pizza slice leftovers, great for humans and city rats alike. Amputated pigeon foot, because there's a bunch of birds with missing feet because of human hair on the ground. And then stolen and now probably cursed exotic artifact, which was heavily based on the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is a good jump into the next project that I did, which started with me compiling all these images of things from various museum databases. So like the Victoria and Albert Museum, Tate Modern, the British Museum, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and finding these weird niche things that made me question about why is a museum using funds to keep a broken window in storage instead of using the funds for something else, like allocating it for more diversity within their collection or newer contemporary works within their collection. And at the same time, there were also all these things happening, like that whole that museum, I think it was in Florida, that had a bunch of fake Basquiats, or I forget, is this like a misattributed sculpture also on the right that was, I think, attributed to Degas, seems wrong, but it was attributed to another artist for decades until they realized that it wasn't really by them. And so they had this like fake history given onto it for years and years. And it made me realize that this kind of institution that is really the front and foremost face of what is art, what can be art, isn't always exactly right all the time, or doesn't know what's going on most of the time. And so at my Sonoma ceramics residency, I made the Museum of Found Objects, which is basically a museum that does everything wrong. And so all these objects are looted from another museum's database or another museum's catalog, and then they are misattributed, mistitled, given a fake history, and then referenced through the artist's first name and last name as an endowment fund. And so, for example, an early Toblerone concept bar is actually an architectural feature from Rome, from the Metz collection. Or the Thinker by Auguste Rodin is actually a Filipino wooden bolol sculpture, but it's given this fake context because it's this museum that thinks they know what really is what. Or this Ai Weiwei jug is really an early American advertising jug that's contextualizing it as this kind of Americana ephemera instead of contemporary art. Or this Pablo Picasso mask made by Arneson, purchased through the Arneson Endowment Fund, is actually an African mask referencing Picasso's actual legacy and use of African masks within his own artwork. Or the Scholar's Rock, that's actually Brian Rochefort, is now this, or this sculpture by Brian Rochefort is now the Scholar's Rock, that now has this really lengthy description that really makes it feel like you can go past it in a museum because you just trust it because it's a big enough body and you're like, Yeah, that's true. And sometimes, they'll have images like this vessel depicting early concept of cosmos, and the images above what researchers have theorized the night sky might have looked like in the 16th century, and it's just a black square. So it's a lot of playing with and just having fun with this fake museum, like this Geyer Anderson cat that is actually just a miniature lead Garfield figurine from the 80s. And then every good museum has a gift shop. And so, it has to have these mugs, these cheap, tacky mugs. It has to have cheap, tacky shirts. And it has to have these kinds of objects that I think can also add into the whole premise of the project. So, like the pencil says, rewriting history, or the eraser says, erasing history never felt so easy. And then pins. And then also for Sonoma, I did this collaboration with Kaveri Suresh and Emma Lanier. And I slipcasted about 60 different objects, and they did this dance performance. I did not put a movie in or a GIF or GIF in because it would just absolutely ruin the presentation and make it lag beyond hell. Where basically they were dancing, and then they broke everything inside this museum. And so it was basically this project about destroying history, erasing it, and then literally putting it under the rug and moving on like nothing happened. And then this project has done a few iterations, such as at Catharine Clark Gallery for SF Art Fair. And with every single iteration, there's also this character that is the museum director and the museum's staff that does all the work, burnt out. And the museum director, chief executive officer, owner is Ron DeSolis or Ron the Solus. And he's just this character. He talks like, so I'm going to do the voice once, but he talks like this, and he welcomes you in the museum with vice rear. And he does this, like, he's just an annoying character that was meant to be this embodiment of everything weird and bad about museum systems. There's the show in its most recent exhibition in London that I just got back from. There's all the 80 works just wrapped in plastic. And something that I wish I could include in this thing is also that they went the extra mile. Now there's an audio guide for this project as well, such as museums having actual audio guides. So people can scan a QR code, and it's a really loud audio of Ron DeSolis just screaming in your ear, which is, I think, the funniest surprise ever. And then keeping up with museums and everything that they do, I figured when people buy things, I want them to take it right away. And when they buy things, I want them to have a deaccession label. So when you go to a museum, sometimes if something's been moved or taken down, there's a deaccession label that gets put up and says, this object is not on view anymore. And I figured it'd be really fun if the people that bought it had to fill it out. And so all these drawings are made by the people that actually bought the works. So it's a fun way of also making them aware that they're sort of ruining the exhibition for everyone else, because now that object is gone and they just have this kind of ghost fragment of what was. And so they get really funny sometimes because some of them don't look exactly like the object that they were. And then I started doing all these ceramic post-its starting in 2020. There's all based on post-its I actually made or I found in galleries, on the ground, or in other people like my friends' houses and things like that. And it was a lot of taking photos and copying these kinds of post-its. And eventually I just got really obsessed with the quantity. I made this installation where there's 400 ceramic post-its and drawings scattered around the gallery. And so it was sort of this testament to quantity. And a lot of times they're rather banal post-its. And for me, it's just like the enjoyment in it is in the fact that there's so many. And the joy is in the quantity, and the quantity being absurd. And so after that, I got really obsessed with advertising signs along the freeway. And so I made this body of work that were ceramic slabs drilled into a wood that would show sort of this food that was being advertised to pull off on the roadway, such as driving to Vegas. You see a lot of like date shakes or burgers with this kind of like custom-made wooden signage. And then it sort of culminated into this project, which was a food pyramid, where it has 61 individual ceramic slabs that are referenced and appropriated from other paintings through art history, so such as Goya's fish. And the actual structure is decaying because it's a clay and acrylic paint base. And it's sort of based on the idea that the food pyramid is this false ideal that was promoted post-war America, and it's this crumbling identity of food or what is good food. And it was the same premise for sort of using and selecting artwork from art history as we advance in an age where we start questioning about who belongs in museums, what should be taught, and who should get more spotlight. Nope. And then this all comes to this project that I did last year, which was a big thing for me because this was a copy of a copy of a copy. And so when I started in ceramics at Berkeley, I got really into Klaus Oldenburg's and Elaine Sturdivant's project, The Store. So in 1961, Klaus Oldenburg made this project called The Store, where he made really god-awful, ugly plaster works based on things that you would find at the store. And that was really cool and all. But in 1967, Elaine Sturdivant, who was one of my favorite artists of all time, copied that project, appropriated it, and copied all the objects that Klaus Oldenburg made in that project, in the other project 6 years earlier. And I've just been really obsessed, and that's the whole reason why I'm into appropriation. And I think earlier that year or the year prior, I found a copy of Klaus Oldenburg's self-published Store Days book, which had a catalog of every object he had in the original project. And Prey Shadows Art Gallery asked me what's a project I've always wanted to do. And I said, I've always wanted to make a copy of The Store. And it just began this 1 year, 1.5 year sort of deep research, buying as many Klaus Oldenburg anthology books as I could in order to make this thing come to life. And, you know, even though it's a lot of research about Klaus Oldenburg, it's really a lot also about Elaine Sturdivant, because she was the one that told me appropriating was fun, and it's a lot more interesting sometimes than making something original. Oh, I forgot that just was in. But so here's the layout for the gallery. Oh, we show this. What's in this? Yeah, so there's all the works that I made during the summer while I was in Boston. They're clay paintings, so they were meant to emulate the plaster paintings that Oldenburg and Sturdivant were making. So they're these really rough, honestly ugly, but in a good way works. And, you know, I was trying to copy that whole Elaine Sturdivant thing where she wasn't trying to go for full replication. She was just going for good enough. And I said, that is really awesome that you don't have to go all the way for something to make it good. And so it's me very roughly copying what Klaus Oldenburg was doing and what Sturdivant was doing. So it's a lot of copying and making it just good enough to be sort of like a glance, and it's there. And that include even making things like the soft sculpture pieces like the giant hamburger or the giant ice cream, or even really niche things like this Times Square figurine that I had to go through 3 different books to go try to find because it's such a weird niche sculpture from them. Or even all the dessert cases and the cigarette with the smoke coming out of it. And so it culminated into this green polka dotted exhibition that tried to copy the kind of anachronistic hanging of Klaus Oldenburg and Sturdivant through those 2 projects. And then there's me and Elaine Sturdivant. And then, of course, I had to make packaging for the show because it was in Boston. So all these things reference Boston things, like Boston Axe and its Sister, Pretty Bad Black and White Cookies. I know we were in Boston, but come on. Week-long disappointment pass for the transit pass in Boston, which is hit or miss. Person haunting, loss-causing Red Sox. And then Fuel for Bostonians, Fuel for America, because I went to every single Dunkin' Donuts in Boston when I was there in the summer. Or every Dunkin' Donuts in Boston, yeah. And then I had the residency at Fountainhead, which is in Miami. And I only had 2.5 weeks to make work. And so I decided to make things based on souvenir mugs that have been left in windows. So, you know, if you go to a gift shop or a tourist shop and there's like things that are massively sun bleached, I thought that was a really cool thing to do. And so I made all these mugs that were these kind of faded, bad souvenir kitschy mugs like Live, Laugh, Love. What about Art South Beach and our Miami Heat? Or I heart Miami-Dade County, but the heart is very not there. And then like really poorly informed mugs, like that's the Golden Gate Bridge with a manatee and a dolphin that says Miami, Florida, and says the city that never sleeps. Or injured by a gator falling coconut, you may be entitled to cash settlement and things like that. I made a mug for when I died. It says in loving memory, and it's just there. And on the other side, it says he's not really dead. He just left the residency. Or, this mug that's also for the worst rated Chinese buffet in Miami. So like they would not make a souvenir mug saying that, but I said, I'm going to do it anyway. And then I made all these ceramic wall hanging paintings or sculptures, however you want to call it, that were based on all these signs that I was seeing around Miami, which I really enjoyed because if you can't tell, I really love the kind of signage that consumerism brings to us. And then that brings me to the Scripps Ceramics Annual that happened earlier this year. And for the Scripps Ceramics Annual, I made 2 stores. One was a mom and pop run Filipino corner store that has been bought out by a larger conglomerate called Niton, which is a reference to, Erewhon in LA. And it's neighboring a gallery that is helping and aiding in gentrification without acknowledging it. And so making this project, I of course had to follow all the things that would need to be there as ephemera to convince you that this is a real place and this is a real thing. And so I had to get this custom made future development thing, as well as all these little flyers that would be handed out and given in those little white slots with all these kinds of double entendres, such as fresh produce that you could recognize because the fruit and vegetables sold this was Filipino fruit and vegetables. So there's a lot of double meanings within a lot of the things. And it also means like, covering in graffiti and then covering it back up with different shades of green like stores do, making custom t-shirts for all the employees and having a mascot because this kind of force of gentrification being a negative thing sometimes, and a lot of the time, most of the times, I figured it should have this kind of being that is this more fun, playful thing, even though it's so evil. And that's based on Lockheed Martin having a cute skunk mascot for being a weapons defense manufacturer contractor. And so the mascot for Niton is based on P-22, which was the puma in LA. And then inside it's covered with all of this other ephemera ranging from statements given by the grocery store, given by the previous owners. There's actual photos of me as a kid in the Philippines as well as my family in order to make it more blurring the lines of what is real and believable and what is not. It also helps that my dad actually did work at grocery stores prior to me and my mom moving over here. And so those photos are scattered around. And same with that same thing that brought me into making all these fake stores in the beginning, making all these fake awards, fake labels, fake newspapers that are trying to say, what's happening, as well as all the random stuff that also happens. Like if you make a paper, you can't just have the main thing. You also have to have some random stuff about sports. And then having all these prices of the fruit change because you have new ownership of this super expensive health food conglomerate that's buying out. So they can't sell for the same cheap price that the previous neighborhood could afford. So they have to sell for a lot more. And so there's all the produce. So you can see ceramics is really, really just a prop within the artwork. And then next door, here's the gallery that is gentrifying without really saying they are or really admitting it. And so it's Jen Fryer Gallery, Gentrifier Gallery, Gentrifier Gallery. And there was this big thing about trying to make sure that anyone that would enter felt unwelcomed. And that ranged everything from, these no solicitation signs, multiple ceramic security cameras, the graded gate, no trespassing signs. You had to make an appointment by scanning a QR code to enter the gallery, and you only had a 1 minute to 5 minute appointment because they don't trust anyone in the neighborhood, even though they're in the neighborhood. If someone was standing outside, I would have to yell at them and tell them that there's no solicitation and point to the sign and tell them that I'd have to call security if anything happened. And then, of course, I would also have to give anyone that came in a really quick tour about Dazzling Mud, which was the amazing exhibition going on at the time. That was sort of an exhibition about having shows and work about nothing. So it was all a bunch of Peter Volks's work just recolored and spray painted. And it was based on this one interaction I had with this one show that I saw where this artist was appropriating Picasso. And I like appropriation. So I got really into the show, and the show statement was sort of just like, by appropriating Picasso, he's asking, where else can I not go? And I thought, oh, that's a pretty weird statement. Like, you can go a lot of places after Picasso. And so it was this idea of just copying for the sake of like trying to say you're the big hotshot now. And so that's what I was doing with this. And the animated GIF and GIF won't load on here, but it was showing the 30-page handout that you would get if you entered the gallery, as opposed to the standard gallery 2-page handout at most. And then all these workers that I hired, I had to take them through training and take them through this kind of word bubble pathway to tell them how to interact with any possible thing that would happen during the entire installation. Because they had a worker in the bodega and a worker in the gallery and a worker as a mascot. So there's a lot of interaction going on, even if you don't know it. And then this is what I have going on right now. I have a 2-person show with Richard Shaw at the Marin Museum of Contemporary Art. It's me making a bunch of everyday banal things and sort of collaging them into piles or stacks of things. And that's sort of based on not only Richard Shaw's work, who I have a weird relationship with him because I started ceramics at Berkeley a few years after he left. So I was working and living with the ghost of Richard Shaw because he had such a big influence in the ceramic space. And so I was looking at his work, I was looking at all the catalogs that he had, and it sort of, I want to say, did make me migrate towards making familiar looking things, but also about, the work I think I'm making for the show is also influenced by Marston Hartley, specifically Portrait of a German Officer, which I learned about in high school, which made me realize that a portrait of a person or people or an event could be made through objects rather than any kind of actual visible thing. Gallery 16 in February, I think, I'm making 3 stores for them. One of them is going to be a donut shop that's replacing the Subway, a nail and beauty salon, and a gun and ammunition store, which is the one I think blocked off by my little thing right there. And so this is based on this plaza that I saw in South Lake Tahoe in 2018 while on vacation with my friends. And I just really thought it was an amazing plaza in terms of making a portrait of America. And so I'm making 3 stores for Gallery 16. And then in September in Miami, I have this project that's based on my hyperfixation on this produce stand 62 miles away from Miami called Robert is Here. And Robert is that older gentleman right there with the beard. And he just has this amazing produce stand with a bunch of fruit. As you know, I like quantity. And so my goal for primary projects is to ship them a ton of fruit, like a literal ton of fruit, and copy as much of the aesthetics of Robert is Here, which I feel like is very doable because I feel like me and him have a very similar taste in like as many fonts as possible, as much details as possible to overwhelm. And yeah, so that's my presentation.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much. That was wonderful. We have time now for some questions. So you can either type your questions out here in the chat or use the little raised hand emoji, and we will call on you to verbally ask those questions. Yeah, see what trickles in. Yeah, I want to see your Photoshop file with all those layers. How long does that? My question is, how long does that take to load up on your computer?
I don't. Oh, let me stop screen share. I don't think it takes too long to load. It has made my heart stop multiple times though, because there comes times when it just gets overwhelmed and it'll freeze. Like when I try to do a certain effect, like especially like when I try to do a blur,
Yeah.
it'll freeze up and I'm like, oh my God. Like the show I did in New York, that had a really big scare because the file that I was making those on. So it's basically like one big file for each show. So that 800 one was for the Catharine Clark show because they had hundreds of works, but the New York one glitched out when I was halfway through, and I was just like,
Oof.
I'm gonna have to restart everything because I also had a 9-year-old MacBook. It was crashing whenever it wanted to, and I was just like praying to God, like whatever happens, please tell me this thing backed it up.
Yeah.
But
Oof. Yeah, very impressive. All right, any questions gonna come through? Anybody got anything? Jenny Duncan, yeah.
Hi, thank you, Reniel. That was wonderful. I love the starting all the way back in undergrad and going all the way through. I love seeing your whole practice. But I was wondering if you could talk about, I know you spent a lot of your life in Benicia and you're interested in Northern California and the funk art ceramics and all that history. And just thinking about like how you bring that in, how you respond to it, maybe how you're reacting to it or moving away from it. I know it's there, but just would love to hear sort of more explicitly what that means to you, that history.
I mean, I really love funk and nut art, and I think, especially growing up in the Bay Area, it's something that is really important to me. Especially like I feel like Arneson, so I grew up in Vallejo, and Arneson's from Benicia. That's the town right next door. And Clayton Bailey had his whole museum in Crockett, right across the Carquinez Bridge. And so it's really close by, and I think of it as much as I can. I don't know how much I'm actually thinking of it when I'm making the work. I think it just finds its way in there because it's the aesthetic I think that I like, and also the aesthetic that lends to me. Because because of the way I make a lot of things, and I don't really have this time to care about every single thing, which I think that's definitely, I'm not trying to say that the funk and nut artists didn't care about their things, but I think that kind of aesthetic helps lend itself to that similar thing, that similar kind of feel and vibe that they were having with them. But I, I love them, and I think they'll always be probably some of my favorite groups of artists. Like I remember I searched for years for the Nut Art catalog that was published for a very short amount of time, and you couldn't find a copy anywhere for under a few $100s. And so it's like I'm obsessed with them, and I love them, and you know, especially Clayton Bailey, because I feel like Clayton Bailey is the one that I never knew about his practice of having these kinds of personas. But the moment I found out about them, I was like, oh, are you kidding me? And his museum was already shut down by then. So I was like, oh my God, I missed out on this kind of treasure trove of connecting with that. But, I love them, and I think they're always going to be connected with me somehow, even if it's just, subconsciously.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, there's definitely the correlation of how you use humor in your work. Like that whole presentation was having me crack up. Really fun work. Yeah, anything else? No pressure. Yeah. All right, maybe we'll just call it here. So thank you all for joining us and for your excellent question. Thank you, Jenny. For more of Reniel Del Rosario's work, you can visit his website at renieldelrosario.com, which will be dropped in the chat here. If you're in the neighborhood around Southern California, come visit the museum and the studio. We're out here in Pomona, California. You can learn more about AMOCA, our ceramic studio, and our residency program, and all of our exhibitions at our website, amoca.org. And a recording of this presentation will be available on AMOCA's website in the coming weeks. So thank you all again for being here. Thanks, Reniel.
Thank you all.
Bye, guys.